Today, we're diving into something every organization talks about, but very few actually execute well: change, and more specifically, how to navigate a true business pivot. I'm joined by the founder of ProPhase Consulting, a firm focused on helping leaders not just react to change, but understand it, communicate it, and actually execute the steps required to move forward. What stood out to me is the idea that change isn't the ending of something, it's the beginning of something new, but only if it's handled with intention. And that's where most struggle today. So we're going to unpack what is really taking the lead through the transitions, what most organizations get wrong, and how to approach pivot in a way that actually creates momentum instead of confusion. So I'd like to welcome Viola. Thank you for being on the show with me today.
Thank you, Joe. I'm very happy to be here.
So you've worked across both private and public sectors, and one theme you've emphasized in our talks is that change is always happening. When did you first realize that most organizations aren't actually equipped to handle that reality?
I think it started when I launched my first FinTech, and I noticed that our idea of success in response to the market and not the change was about how well we could emulate and copy other models. Right from as a startup, you know what it's like when you go with pitch deck after pitch deck, and everybody who gives you a piece of advice tells you, make this change, make this tweak. Many startup founders don't actually have the chutzpah, the guts, or the wherewithal to say, actually, I reject that change. That's because they're not really sure which way they're meant to be going. They just know that if they execute the steps that they've seen as popular right now for their sector or their innovation, they do exactly what the guys at Silicon Valley are doing. They should end up with the same results, but it's not one size that fits all. It's only in hindsight that I understood that that's where the problem began, at least for me and the companies that I was building.
So you said in hindsight, which brings me to my next question then. Where did you get started and what brought you to starting this business?
I have to say, are you talking about ProPhase Consulting?
Yeah, ProPhase Consulting or just consulting in general?
Well, I'd had my hand in traditional consulting through companies like KPMG Consulting, Unisys Corporation. We even bought out the old Arthur Andersen state and local government and federal business. And I saw and understood consulting from the big side, from where you're speaking to corporate America, you're integrating Oracle, and you're doing all of those things. And it's very textbook. You walk the halls, you create relationships, you go to lunch, you listen to what they want, and you pull out your usual bag of tricks and you give them exactly what the next guy has, because everybody wants to be included in what is generally acceptable. I come from the era of nobody gets fired for hiring IBM, and they want to make sure that if they are differentiated in the market somehow, it's not so far away that investors go, I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm not going to take the risk. So having gone through that evolution, started Ovamba Solutions in 2013, raised a large amount of money without realizing that I was actually onto something. We took our innovation from the peer-to-peer sector over to Central Africa and assumed that because we came from the Western world, we were smart. That was the first time I ever had to pivot. It feels absolutely nerve-wracking and frightening to realize that no battle plan will survive contact with the enemy. Most businesses will have to pivot the minute they attempt to do what they're doing, because you can't calculate for the unknown. I've been recently writing about those black swan moments from pivoting and what that's like from a consulting side. So we wanted to do peer-to-peer lending, but we didn't want to be a bank. Nobody had defined this space, and we ended up creating an alternative trade finance product that is very well emulated today, but we did not have the ability to pivot through the entire growth cycle because we were still trying to experiment our way forward. My first mistake as a leader who has now mastered the act of pivoting is you have to step back, recalibrate, and make sure that the narrative that is going along with the change is ready for shaping an ecosystem, not just the survival of the company. These are all the learnings that I brought with me into ProPhase. So after running Ovamba for about 10 to 12 years and understanding that between COVID, the quiet civil war going on in South Cameroon, I actually had amassed a skill set that taught me, in hindsight again, I've been pivoting and changing correctly through some of these shifts that were unforeseen. How can I codify them? How can I teach them? And how can I use those experiences to help my clients, which I've been doing.
Very interesting. So you talk a lot about helping leaders understand and communicate the need for that pivot.
Exactly.
Where do you see most leaders break down? Is it the strategy itself or the ability to bring people along with it?
It's a little bit about both. I was recently blogging and writing about the asymmetry of management, the velocity that gets lost when we try to shift without understanding that really good leaders understand that there is a massive gap. That gap might be in your ability to communicate the change and convince people to come along. The gap may be that even though you've communicated, you haven't explained why the destination has changed or the journey has changed. You're often responding to whatever is screaming at you the loudest. And in our case, sometimes it was investors, sometimes it was market regulation. Frequently, it was the customer, and the customer is not always right. You put all of those into a bag, and leaders have to figure out even the gaps within themselves. So you're going to bring the best and the worst of your persona and your fears when you are faced with imminent change that was not part of the plan. Leaders make the mistake of not looking for where the advantage is in the unexpected. They immediately believe that risk management is about making sure nothing bad happens. Oh, no, no, no. Risk management also makes sure that you leave room for the good things to happen, or to at least be able to communicate that under perfect circumstances, this shift and change could result in X, Y, and Z. Let's bring the right group together and let's ideate and even scenario develop. And I bet you there are people doing amazing work with AI in order to do that and set scenarios that can give you outcomes. And I think that's where we make the mistake, that change is bad. It wasn't planned for. I'm supposed to have all of the answers. You don't. You're supposed to be asking the smart questions.
So let me dig into that a little bit more. There's a line that you've used around giving up the comfort and what's been built in order to step into the unknown.
Yes.
What have you seen separates the leaders who actually make that leap from the ones that stall out?
Oh, Joe, I almost started quoting Captain Picard from Star Trek. Strangely enough, is a complete totem pole in terms of leadership for me. And I know it sounds lame, but I am
Yeah.
certainly going to go there. But I think that leaders who can say, I am not sure of X, but I am sure of Y, are able to create a sense of functional vulnerability when they say, I'm not sure, but this is what I think. And I think this is how we should proceed. And this is the exact kind of help that I need from you. And then there's a second layer that I've begun to experiment with, and that is to ask teams with this area of the unknown that we're in, how do you think it would serve you in your role at the company or in the enterprise? Because leadership is about allowing teams to become the best of who they are through the genesis of business evolution. At least that's one definition. It's one that I believe in wholeheartedly. I've had very interesting changes. And if I may, I would like to illustrate a story.
Go for it. Yeah, please.
When we were operating Ovambo in Cameroon, we had a driver, and all he did was drive us from A to B and make sure that nobody duped us because we didn't speak any French. But when we found that we had to make a shift in our business model from working with microfinance institutions, we had to find a way to speak with businesses directly. We were not sure how this was going to pan out. And out of nowhere, from the front of the car, he said, Madame, do you mind if I share an opinion? And I said, yeah, sure. He said, I believe that you can do this, but only if X, Y, and Z. So when I began to ask him more questions, not only was this individual, he had the street smarts that we were missing as pure business operators from the West.
Right.
Was able to help us to prevent a lot of fraud, because in his mind, if he did not help this Western company to succeed, he was going to miss out on a lucrative job. And he made it very clear to us, your success is now tied to mine. Joe, that guy runs the company today.
Oh,
He's the general manager of Amber in Cameroon, and he is incredibly capable.
that's a great story.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, that was very insightful. Your work spans everywhere from small business to Fortune 100s.
Mhm.
What's surprisingly similar about how both ends of the spectrum struggle with this change?
Both ends of the business struggle with reputation management in a day and age where the digital is out there and everything is seen. Things don't happen in quiet bubbles behind the scenes, and everything is under a microscope. So many times we will lead with who we are and what we've done as a signpost to how great we're going to be later. There is that in common. But there's also the fact that they are all trying to manage position in the market, revenue, profit, and maintaining the best of their teams while also addressing first place in the race for innovation. One of the things that I found to be surprisingly true is that I sometimes believe it's better to be second place in the market. But both small and medium enterprises and large businesses believe that their value is best served if they can appear to be the first to do something, the first in the market, the leader of a market. But when you're in the second place, you don't have to work as hard because you're now in a stalking horse position and you can pay attention to what's going wrong. So both of these groups are looking at what's unknown, how to maintain their position, how to keep the second runner as far behind them, how to manage resources, optimize teams, and just maximize what they have at any one point in time.
It's interesting. You have had your own missteps that you talked about today and pivots across different sectors.
Yep.
Where or was there a specific moment or failure that really shaped how you guide others today?
Yeah. Wow. At the end of Ovamba's life cycle, when I realized that I thought that I had been a complete and utter failure, that I had let people down, and that the dream of becoming one of the biggest African fintechs was over, I thought it was actually over. And I think it was taking a look at my own humanity and trying to salvage what I had learnt and provide a sense of value and comfort for myself in that made me realize that I haven't lost everything at all. This can be parlayed into something completely different in the way that I want to manage a company because I've learned a lot. I've learned what it means to have an entrepreneurial divorce from a business partner. I've learned what it means for people to look to me thinking that they and their families are going to survive and become millionaires or whatever, and it didn't happen. The hubris to understand that that dream is ended, but it's not the end of what the future holds. And that's why I say change is not the end, it's the beginning of something. And it was the end of Avamba that allowed me to be honest about here's how you avoid some of the mistakes I made, and here's the value in what I've learned. You don't learn from the good times. I believe there's a story about Steve Jobs who said that he had somebody on the team who made a very expensive mistake. And when they said, well, why aren't you firing him? He said, why would I take that investment and give it to somebody else to use? Because I've learned that if you make mistakes in the process of trying to get it right, that's valuable. If you make the same mistake over and over again without paying attention to the signposts along the way, you are a twit and you ought to go off to Twitsville. You're not staying here anymore. So that idea about change and looking back, especially as a woman, the things I've had to navigate, the things I've experienced, and how all of that comes to bear allowed me to build ProPhase Consulting because the art of the pivot is something that we're always going to have to dance.
It's interesting. And thank you for the humor in the story there. You use the word choreograph when it comes to
Ah,
guiding a pivot, which is pretty intentional choice.
yes, it is.
What are the key steps leaders tend to skip when they are trying to move too fast?
They miss the steps and the cadence, the rhythm of it. We all, and this is, I'm trying not to sound hokey and trippy. One of the things that happened after I came out of the Ovamba phase, I lost control and a sense of who I was because I no longer had the same context by which to compare myself. I was no longer Viola Llewellyn, headscarf wearing FinTech maven of the world. I was no longer the woman who was known for loving Batman and Captain Picard and using them as my North Stars. I could not figure out, well, who am I in this world? I didn't want to trust AI. I was not comfortable with the new tools and the new metrics and the KPIs that were out there. However, having gone through all of that and I discovered something called human design, what I realized was missing in my life was that I did not know how to leverage my purpose. What were the tools I was born with that were my talent then that have stayed with me this time that I can leverage at this age? And it's communication and responding. Those are the two things that I take and I illuminate as much as I can. Once I understood that that's the doorway I go through, I am no longer involved in tech innovation and I don't want to do that anymore. And it's okay to say, I have shut that door. I don't want to do that, but I do want to take the pieces and rebuild something else. And I'm far more interested in how human beings operate through change and respond to culture, the digital landscape, and bridge those divides that are constantly coming up when new innovation enters our world and creates new ways in which we have to get things done. And that's why I use the word choreography. There's a dance. There is a rhythm. Different leaders operate and move in different ways. It's not always right now that you have to respond. There's times to move fast. There's time to move slow. But I do believe that each individual leader has a cadence to the way in which they operate change and the way people respond to them, how they elicit trust, how they think things through. I tend to think very, very quickly. I tend to be focused on the ending. My husband believes that I am terrible about thinking about A, B, C, D, Z. He says, well, what about M, N, L, O, P? And I'm thinking, oh, I'm sure we'll get to that. But as my leadership has matured, I am actually interested in MNLOP. I just do not want to dwell there for too much longer because I know that there are people that can do that. And that is not how I operate. I'm very good at finding, here's the pattern, here's the vortex, here are the parameters. This is the goal. We'll seek the hill. When we get there, we'll figure out what have we learned from the response we executed so that it can be replicated or digitized for the next time.
So going down that path, I kind of understand where you're going with that. And looking ahead, organizations are facing all these shifts and changes. And we know the market today is far different than it was even a year ago. Got AI,
Absolutely.
market volatility, workforce changes. What signals should leaders actually pay attention to so they know it's time to pivot?
Great question. I'm trying to think how to best answer this based on sectors that I am comfortable with. Things start to shift when your revenue opportunities do not look the same anymore. Things start to shift when other leaders are speaking differently about things that you felt you had your hands on. Things shift when your consumers change their allegiance. Things shift when interest rates move. Things shift when investors change where they're investing their capital. When you take all of those together and you find it is harder to get customers on the phone, it's harder for customers to commit. People want shorter exposures to risk or to revenue. These are all canaries in the coal mine. I think when you look at inside of a company, you may find there's a shift in the behavior of staff who are noticing either toxicity, which I write about, or they're asking for more in order to feel a sense of fulfillment. Any one of these micro changes can escalate into something that is quite an avalanche. If you're in the tech space, the frightening idea that you've spent and invested into something that will become obsolete very, very quickly means that the kind of shift and change you need to make has to lean towards advanced innovation beyond that. I find that speaking to customers and asking what they imagine is going to happen to their businesses in the future is a good way to navigate a new path to how you respond, how you innovate, not just by copying everybody else. And I heard some very interesting things about that just yesterday and in our own business environment. We thought that customers wanted more money. They didn't. Customers wanted less debt. That was a very telling thing to us. That told us a customer is far more likely to allow you to hold an asset to back the capital that you put in place, as long as they're able to quote unquote buy it back. And that's how we innovated alternative trade finance in Africa. Recently, I spoke to a wonderful man by the name of Ken Sandy, who is the founder of a dry cleaning company in the Maryland, Washington, D.C. area called Dry, D-R-Y-Y, when the pandemic hit. and people were not going to work anymore. And all of that infrastructure for dry cleaning and all of the vehicles they had, he instead turned that into community transportation for those very same customers. And they did not leave him out of loyalty. They all came back later. So when you find a way to serve the needs of your best customers, like we did during the Civil War, we picked the best performing customers and ensured that their businesses were running because we saw the signs and we had to pivot, and we pivoted to support versus just being revenue oriented. And some people are able to do that if there's enough loyalty equity in their return on investment from what they've done historically with customers.
So you mentioned that you saw the signs. What tools or what capabilities or what strategies are you using to identify these signs in your business?
Well, my business now is consulting. And one of the things that I thought was a sign was the idea that capital constraints are going to make it difficult for businesses to invest in intellectual property or invest in support from people like myself. I was wrong. It's because of the way I framed it in my head. I assumed that the relationship of money to consultants was the equation. It's not. It's investment in value creation by outsourcing the ability to think through the best scenarios. And that's how I was able to get ProPhase Consulting to position itself correctly with businesses. So there is a signal out there where you have to know the difference between value and capital expenditure, and you have to know the difference between revenues difficult contract, revenues difficult actually acquire something, expand, and take on different balance sheet risk. It all depends on the sector that you're in. But I have learned that sometimes when the crowd is running this way, you might want to go that way and see what's going on, because it could be that opportunities being left on the table. And if you can reframe the gap, and if you can turn that into, this is a possible value creation in the next 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, and this is what I'm willing to do to risk being in this gap with you and walk you through the process, help you with the choreography, there's a strong chance, if we keep incrementally testing, that this is the right way to go.
Consequently, that aligns perfectly with you because Batman would be running that way, opposite of the crowd, right? So you have this box, you figured out how to get out of your own box in your
Yes.
mental space. So you've got successful strategies for that. What are some of the bottlenecks you're still struggling through
Yeah.
in your own business to get to where you think you need to be?
Pipeline, excessive ideation with myself and people I work with. It's not every nail that needs a hammer right now. It's not a case of my ideas work everywhere. I have to select. When you are a solopreneur or a consultant with a very small group, you have to find something to dig down deeply. You are not really in a position to go very, very wide. You do not want to be known as all things to everyone. You want to be able to find who's looking for you. So one of the bottlenecks that I have chosen to turn into an advantage for me, I used to think that, oh my word, I'm not viral. I'm not all over the place on LinkedIn. But when I looked at how I was strangulating my own pipeline by not servicing it properly because I was so busy trying to be everywhere else, I instead decided I'm only looking for who's looking for me. And I know what that avatar looks like now because of what I've been through. The product that I offer is the experience attached to my humanity and the ability to say, this is where I've screwed up, let me help you out. I also bring with that some business common sense and a great track record for what I've done. That is not going to be replicated by AI. That's me. I can leverage AI to help me to create a bigger front of office. I can use AI to help me create my theories of change based on my own inputs. I can use my AI to model things with my clients, but I prefer to do it very much from a humanistic standpoint. I've created a lot of different things with AI in order to do that. So my bottlenecks at the moment is just pipeline development and making sure that I continue to focus on looking for who is looking for me and avoid the distraction of the number of people that want to sell you coaching and this and that and the virality. I made 8 figures by doing this. That is an attention swamp. That can really get in the way because you start to think, am I losing my place? Am I leaving money on the table? I ought to do so much more of all these different things. No, stay in your lane, service that lane.
and then hire those that can fulfill the other parts outside of your lane.
Exactly.
So, and that's really great and important, because I think that, and the purpose that I'm trying to deliver to all of my listeners is that AI can be a great tool, just like the computer was a great tool when it came
Yeah.
along, and it does scare people. But at the end of the day, the people that are going to be successful with AI are the ones that build authentic relationships and only use AI to drive towards that authentic relationship.
Yes.
And with that, I mean, if leadership teams get this right, as we've discussed here today, if they embrace change instead of resist it, what does that unlock for them at the next level?
First of all, I love what AI can do for me. I hate what it can do to me. And this is where, and I'll talk about it globally. From an African perspective, one of the things that I have been screaming and advocating for the longest time is to understand the psychology and to digitize culture. What goes into AI stays in AI. So leaders, when using AI and when using and designing around machine learning, be very aware your humanity is going in here, and that influence has long legacy attached to it. There are so many things that will have to be unlearned once you have been through this arc. So as I work with things, and I remember just starting out by having a very dear heart-to-heart with Claude and told it my deepest, darkest dreams, and then try to extrapolate and start to say, all right, this is what I've put in, and this is how I need it to work for me, because the human imagination is inimitable. It is vast, and AI will constantly catch up to embrace it and to try to be there as that interface to our output. So for leaders around AI, be very aware that you are in charge. Don't let the tail wag the dog. The inputs that you put in and the way you operate with it, you must be very intentional and very, very thoughtful.
What you put into it is what you get out of it, for sure.
Absolutely. And never make staff feel as if, you know what, if you go home tomorrow, I might just decide to lock you out forever because I've got this new tool here. Because it doesn't work there. Look what happened at the end of Pompeii. With every evolution, usually once an empire has fallen, the only thing that you know is the art that was left. What did the humans make with their hands? That still means something. And I'm betting on the fact that we'll go through this. There'll be some sort of a bubble, not quite like the dot-com time, but all of a sudden, the ability for humans who have developed creative imaginations, who can operate within that space, will be the ones that win the race. Those of us who are a little bit on the old fogey side and were born in the analog times, yes, we are digital facing, digital enabled, but there is so much that we can bring from that time into this digital sphere that will have amazing relevance. Humans are so Renaissance oriented. I think there's some interesting things coming ahead.
Yeah, you can always learn from history. I can attest to that for sure. Well, this has been a
Yes.
great conversation.
Thank you.
Y'all, I think that the big takeaway here is that change isn't optional, but how you respond to it is.
You must learn to have an ability to respond each and every
Right?
time.
Well, and the differences between organizations that stand or stall and those that grow with the changes, right? Bill, I really appreciate you sharing your perspective, your experience, and some of your real world lessons behind it,
Thank you.
from an international level, by the way. So, for those listening, if there's a conversation sparking something in you and you'd like to reach out, where can they find you?
You can find me at www.prophaseconsulting.com, and that's prophase with a Z, not an S. And you can find me with the hashtag The Art of the Pivot. I've got a newsletter that goes out, I blog, and I'm usually somewhere having a good old chinwag with somebody about it.
Chinwag with the chinwag.
It's British for talking.
I love it. I love it. So, whether it's around leadership, alignment, or navigating your own pivot, this is the kind of stuff that she can help you with. Thanks again for being here, and we'll see you on the next episode.
It was groovy. Thank you, Joe.